Hello,
Oh my God.
this is Chris Anderson calling Rick Byer in
Lexington, Massachusetts. I can't believe you're here in person.
This is an international show.
You flew over just for the
Just
for the broadcast.
Yes. Actually, I came here to Lexington so that I could apologize for the Colonials being, they're really sorry. I want to make sure that...
You're saying that the Crown Forces are sorry.
No, they have nothing to be sorry.
No, you're saying that the Colonials are sorry about that dust up here in Lexington in
all
1775.
big misunderstanding. Yep, we're all good.
Okay. Well, good. In any case, it's great to see you.
You too.
I've been looking at you in that little box.
I know.
How long?
In this little box.
I know. And I can't hardly hold the phone out far enough to get us both in. We're such big American men.
History Happy Hour spans the globe.
I know, it's amazing. So we're here because we're actually not doing the show this week.
No.
Which is to say, this is a encore presentation
of
History Happy Hour.
Hour.
Oh, where's the bell?
Bing.
Well, the bell will come in a minute.
Okay.
And so the encore show this week is with
Helen Fry.
Helen Fry, a great show that we did with her, a British historian, talking about bugging the German generals. And I don't mean, she wasn't like asking them a lot of annoying questions.
No.
Not that kind of bugging.
Listening.
Yeah, listening to the German generals. That's this week on History Happy Hour. And have we delayed long enough?
I think so.
Okay, so we can, thanks for joining us for the encore presentation. Lead us into that open.
And we'll see you next week. The bar is open.
The bar is open, and Mr. Anderson, the floor is yours.
Well, it's going to come as no great surprise to you that our guest tonight far surpasses us in output and ability. Dr. Helen Fry is an expert on the Germans who fled Nazi Germany before the war and came to Britain and served in the British forces during World War II, and also all manner of intelligence operations. She is the author of 25 books, so just a few more than you or I. And I first, just a scotch, as my wife says.
Yeah.
But I first became aware of Dr. Fry. I went to one of her lectures at the National Army Museum. It was a wonderful lecture about German Jewish refugees making their way to Britain and their contribution to the war effort. Then after the lecture, I picked up a book called The Walls Have Ears. And there you go. And it really kind of blew me away. I like to think I'm pretty well read about the war, and this is something that just sort of totally slipped my mind. So this will be our topic for tonight. It's fascinating. And I also want to add that since then, she's gone on to write a book, published book called MI9, which came out this year. So The Walls Have Ears came out in 2019, and then MI9 this year. I'd never really heard about this story, and I'd like you to kind of explain to our viewers what the book is about, and how you came on the story.
Yeah, so it's always, I suppose, with many intelligence stories, quite often just by chance meeting with a veteran. And you mentioned at the beginning that I've been doing some research on the 10,000 Jews who fought, German Jews and Austrians who fought for Britain during the Second World War. And very quickly you discover that many of them got taken up for intelligence work. And I'd known for a number of years a particular veteran, Fritz Lustig, and he said to me, I wanted to fight on the front line. He was originally born in Berlin, a German Jew. I wanted to fight in the front line. I was never given the chance. He said, instead, I was stuck in Buckinghamshire with these headphones on, and he said, did we do anything that made any difference to the outcome of the war? We were listening in to the conversations of German prisoners of war, and he said, we were told by the commanding officer, Kendrick, that what we were doing was as important as fighting on the front line or firing a gun in action. And he said, but we kind of didn't really get a sense of that. And of course, at the end of the war, this wall of silence, and he was left with that question 65 years later when I first met him, 65 years later. So I promised him I would tell the story, and that's where I uncovered this incredible story. No one had told the British side of the story of the intelligence personnel and secret listeners like Fritz Lustig. So I kept my promise to
Yes, you did.
him and waded through thousands, tens of thousands of files for about over 15 years. But it was worth it.
Absolutely.
So this is an operation. I mean, I think the part that I'm most interested in we'll get to shortly, which is sort of the bugging of the German generals who are captured German generals. But that's part of a bigger operation, right? A sort of an intelligence gathering operation with German prisoners that starts, and you can kind of give us the overview of it. It starts actually in Tower of London, which is a wonderful. If it was a movie, you couldn't make that up, right? So.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I know, and often the story comes in a bit later, and people know about the later part of the story at the other sites. But yeah, I uncovered this amazing fact that this fortress, or one of our biggest tourist attractions in London, was actually used from the outbreak of war. The day that Poland was invaded, Kendrick turns up at the Tower of London to open his unit. And it's not very long, actually, before the first German prisoners start arriving. And that, for me, was extraordinary, because this is a very small beginning. He had just 6 staff, Air, Navy and Army intelligence. And we already had 60 German prisoners of war, as you will have read, in the Tower of London within about 3 weeks of the outbreak of war. Mostly U-boat crew at that point, of course. And then a few weeks later, you got shot down Luftwaffe pilots. And it very quickly ramps up, and across the wartime becomes what I've described actually as an industrial scale intelligence operation. And you just think, if you took away all the knowledge of what was gained from those prisoners of war, and they were all ranks, obviously not the generals yet, they weren't captured until North Africa, but you could legitimately ask the question, could we have won the war? And it is extraordinary, the stuff we are beginning to pick up.
Yeah.
And the generals are of course they're not on the front line. That's why they're not captured first, right? They're like, you boys be on the front line. We'll stay back.
Or we'll get there eventually.
And Chris, just as a housekeeping, is your power still plugged in there?
Or? Oh yeah, let me take it.
Yeah, that will help. Yeah, there we go. And so go ahead. Sorry.
So just we'll get into this, but a lot of this is we talk about. These German generals that are held at this British country estate. And I should tell the viewers that this isn't Stalag 13, okay? This isn't Hogan's Heroes. I want to read a quote from the book that says, "Instead, the generals found themselves living a life of relative luxury at, they believed, the generous behest of the king, and according to their status as military commanders. And this played right into their sense of self-importance. Their every need was catered for, and they began to relax into their surroundings. Trent Park could be likened to a traditional, privileged, and exclusive gentleman's club in central London." So, this isn't... When I think of, German prisoners, or I think of, the Gestapo guys with lights and eyes and the whole... They had it pretty good, and this was a deliberate kind of ploy by the British. How did that idea come about of how to treat these guys?
Well, it really is the not the brainchild, but the genius of Commander Kendrick, Thomas Joseph Kendrick, who'd already spent nearly 30 years working for SIS, or some form of intelligence, before SIS was founded. So he had a lot of experience from just after the Boer War, and so he really is the man that brings this to its success. He has the vision. I mean, obviously he has a whole team working with him, but what I discovered was a lot of it is about psychology. And you mentioned, yes, you're quite right, hold them in Stalag 3 or 13 or whatever, or Flag 4, whatever you want to hold it, as our prisoners were. But this is the equivalent to German prisoners, in particular the generals, in Nissen huts with barbed wire. They're going to behave like prisoners of war. So we've got Hitler's top commanders, first captured in the battlefields of North Africa. By the end of the war, we've got a staggering nearly 100 senior commanders in that house. You cannot waste that opportunity from an intelligence point of view. So it's really, there they are. arriving. But look, they're saluting. And it's kind of everything against what we would think of. You were quite right when you said that about prisoners of war. And it doesn't matter what rank they were treated well. But of course, at Trent Park, they were treated extra specially well. They believed the king had given them Trent Park. There they are, relaxed in the grounds, looking incredibly happy. And what I discovered, because I was expecting after my conversation with Fritz, and we worked together very closely for a number of years, right up until he passed away a couple of years ago. I was expecting to use the bugged conversations, which I did, but I uncovered all these intelligence reports which give us the daily life of the antics. And what you find is this whole dramatic stage set is going on in the house. The generals have just walked into it. They don't realise that everything is a masquerade, really. They think they're running the show, and we allow them to do it.
Right.
You know, they're strutting around. The occasional general, when he comes off the battlefield, forgets and does a Nazi salute. Others are arguing, and we just allowed them to get on with it because they didn't realise, of course, everywhere was mic'd. You know, the bugging devices were hidden wherever they could be hidden.
I love those the transcriptions that you have in the book where it has these German generals coming back after being questioned, saying, "Oh, these English are too stupid; they don't even know what they're doing," and meanwhile they're taking everything down.
It's psychology again. You see, it's giving them a source of a phony interrogation, if you want to call it that. Well, it was called interrogation, but it's really more of a sort of debriefing, friendly chat. And sometimes it was done at two of the other sites. Not the generals from North Africa, but later when there were lots of generals coming up, particularly after D-Day, and swathes of these top commanders. And they arrive first at Latimer House or Wilton Park in Buckinghamshire, so not that far from London. And they get their debriefing, the friendly chat around the grounds, and then they think they know what's happening. They think, oh, they're trying to get some information out of us, and they're well treated. And then they're transferred to Trent Park and just sort of left alone. And they think their war is over. They think they're there for 2 or 3 years in some cases, and they just completely relax. And they're not stupid, of course. Most of them are highly educated, top commanders that have fought in the First World War, but they're not thinking. It's all, I think, about psychology. That's my analysis.
Yeah.
So what we have. In essence, and Chris said it's not Hogan's Heroes, and that was a TV show, and I don't know if you're familiar with it in the United States, with American prisoners of war in Germany who are really actually running a whole incredible operation under the nose of the German prison camp commander. Ridiculous, silly series that many of us still love, nonetheless. And
careful, don't take that too far.
And but there is this element of fakery or showmanship here. They've brought the Germans to this country house, this Trent Park, this country house. They've given them nice rooms. They all have their aide-de-camps, their batmen, as they call them. They are given nice meals, maybe not as nice as they'd like as German generals. They are taken on excursions to London once in a while. Hey, would you like to go on a trip to London? So they're doing all this, and meantime, they've got a whole incredible number of people in the basement, essentially, in the M room, in the recording room. They are recording every single word in the dining room, the bedroom, the whole thing. It is really an incredible operation, and there's even a fake lord involved in this. I mean, they've got other fake things, and didn't they have enough real lords? I don't know, but they have a fake lord that they bring in for this.
Oh, I love the fake lord. Because, Kendrick and the intelligence chiefs, they were sort of chatting one day with the generals arriving and said, well, I think to soften them up a bit more, we think it would be a good idea for them to have, a welfare officer. So the Director of Military Intelligence says, oh, yes, what sort of major? No, says Kendrick. The generals love an aristocrat. And so they created Lord Aberfeldy. And the name is no coincidence. I don't know if anyone's cottoned on, but of course Aberfeldy is a whiskey distillery. So they named him after a whiskey distillery, which is just typical humour of the intelligence service, I think, that shot through this whole story. And he befriends them. And of course, we're picking up from the microphones what they think of him. And they think, he's kind of secretly, well, he's not really Nazi, they say, but he's very sympathetic towards us. And I think he's on our side. And he's got, did he show you the photograph of the castle? Oh, yes, his castle in Scotland. It's all complete nonsense. And when he went, he took the occasional 2 or 3 generals, a smaller group, to some of the clubs in central London, some of the drinking, and even our aristocrats didn't realise he was fake. And he was a senior intelligence officer, Ian Munro. I just love it. He was quite young, actually. He was only in his mid-20s. But again, he did have a wooden leg. And that was, and you read that in the book, another, trick. He would sort of hobble after a while, walking around the grounds, hobble to the seat in the front of the guards. I've got to sit down, his gammy leg. And they would sit there because the seat was mic'd. I don't know how you bug a seat. But and the trees, of course, you picked that up. The trees in the garden, again, that's
everything. The pool table's bugged outside the windows. Everything is bugged.
You to work that out. And it's all wired back, as you say, to this secret area in the basement, and the German generals don't know. So
this is, it is very humorous, but it's also very serious. Yeah. And John has asked, and I was going to ask you, can you talk about some of the areas in particular where the intelligence gain was so important or so effective?
Yes, absolutely. And when I started out on this, people said, "Oh, she's banging on about this being as important as the code breaking at Bletchley Park." But actually now, it has been recognised as such. And the reason, what we need, this is my precursor to what I'm going to say, we need our historians now to start looking at the volumes of intelligence, because you get a sheer sense that this has impacted on the Battle of the Atlantic. The stuff in there I've never read before, stuff on the Dieppe raid, although it was a failed raid. But for me, I always give one example, it's one in the book, where I trace for the first time the direct link between the bugged conversations and as we've picked up about secret weapon in the Tower of London, but we don't quite know what it is. But by early 43, we've got stuff coming out from agents behind enemy lines. We need to corroborate it. We haven't really taken it seriously. We're not too sure. The RAF had flown over the site Peenemünde on the North German coast in 1942, and it wasn't really possible to tell from those photographs what was going on there. And as you will have read, I trace a link between the conversations in March 1943, the first of which actually was at Latimer House with paratrooper. And now we're kind of on alert, and they're talking about ramps and rockets. And then 10 days later, the generals at Trent Park are talking, about losing the war. They're very depressed. Kendrick writes, our guests are gloomy because of the fall of Stalingrad. They'd had delayed news of that. And ultimately, they thought they'd lost. And it's General Fontoma who says to one of the other unnamed generals, "No, we haven't. We've got the secret weapon." "What do you mean?" And then very quickly they start to talk about that. And so I do trace, they mean the V1, the V2, and then they start to talk actually about Peenemünde. And there is a direct line between that and the bombing of Peenemünde in August 43. That's without a shadow of a doubt now. And I do the paper trail for that. And I have now come across a reference which describes this piece of intelligence from the bugged conversations as being the closest to war-winning intelligence we will ever get. And I thought, yes.
Right.
And that was,
it's going to be a great moment, right, when you find something like that.
I mean, honestly, I've never seen a reference like that. They said this is the closest we will ever get to war-winning intelligence. And I would just finish this little bit by saying, I guess it is obvious, and people are probably thinking in their mind, well, it didn't stop the V1s. No, it didn't. And we were always racing to get the mobile launch sites again, partly from bug conversations. But it meant the first V1 didn't land on London until the 13th of June 1944, so about a week after D-Day. Well, what if we hadn't discovered it in time?
Right.
What if we hadn't?
Well, and I would just add, I don't want to give too much away, John, but I mean, she also talks about huge impact on the Battle of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Intelligence about operations in 1944 that don't get acted upon. Operation Market Garden, for example, but the contribution is huge. One of the things that you also kind of allude to that I'd like you to maybe expand a bit on is Trent Park in this operation. They're working with Bletchley. These aren't two disconnected things. How are they working together?
So that's something which, again, I discovered for the first time, and it takes years and years. There was a very early version of the book to come out in Fritz's lifetime, but unfortunately he saw the second book, the version to more in-depth research, because of course bringing out the first version about 8 or 9 years ago meant that people came out of the woodwork, etc., etc. And yeah, you're absolutely right that this stuff impacted as early as 1940. It takes a while for the stuff to come out of the woodwork, but yeah, pieced it together.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, and there's also, and again, without giving everything away, there's stuff there that affects the Battle of Britain, essentially, the efforts to fight off. There's a lot of tech stuff, right? That is a big part of the as opposed to this unit's going to go here or this year, but it's what's been developed that the generals have been clued into that the British don't know about yet.
Yes, and it's not only air stuff, of course, but you mentioned Bletchley. What we needed as well was stuff on Enigma. And I'm so bold as to say, and this is my hunch, and it'd be nice for historians to corroborate this, we are picking up stuff on naval Enigma in early January 1940, of which Bletchley is involved, and we're sending personnel up to Bletchley saying, basically, what do you need to know? And by 43, we are facilitating Bletchley Park in interrogations because they also need to find out, what to do. And so I get a feeling that one of the first codes were broken with the help of Trent Park, but I need some sort of tech experts to kind of corroborate what I've written about that in the book, but it's really clear, and it's in one of the hut histories of Bletchley Park. So there's that, but you're absolutely right. The discovery of technology on the new technology on the aircraft, German aircraft, known as Ex-Gerät Knichtbein, Battle of the Beams, if people know about the Battle of the Beams. Right. That was said later that without that discovery, we would have lost the Battle of Britain.
Well, and Helen, you also make a mention in the book about one of the U-boat officers that's being interrogated says, oh yeah, we have this Enigma machine, and he used these rotors, and so he's actually explaining how this machine that is so famous now actually works.
Yeah, right. I mean, when I saw that in the files, you kind of, your eyes pop out. You have to reread it and question, am I interpreting this correctly? And it is absolutely clear, and this is early, as you say, it's January 1940. One of our naval interrogators is boasting about our naval codes and they're unbreakable, all this kind of stuff. Because he knows the German prisoner he's talking to is not going to escape. At this point, this guy's still in the Tower of London, this particular prisoner. So he knows he's never... So he can tell him a few bits. Of course, he boasts back. And Penelope befriends him. And this guy, May, actually starts writing down how the Enigma code works. And you're right, the rotors. And I just find it extraordinary. Yeah. And that again appears in the Bletchley Park history, that this piece of intelligence actually helped with the cracking of the naval Enigma, because it gave Alan Turing and the others an opportunity to go back and look at some stuff that they'd been looking at in 1938. So, the two were working very, very closely for the duration of the war, and I find that exciting too.
Absolutely.
Well, so viewers of this show know that I have a special interest in the Ghost Army. And which is an an American Army unit that did battlefield deception in World War II, did 21 different battlefield deceptions. Not as important a part of World War II as Trent Park, certainly. But the thing that struck me as being in common is that these are two stories that are both declassified in essentially right around the turn of the century, right around 2000. And with more coming out on each one in the succeeding years. And that the thing is that for many historians, the picture, they already have a mental map of World War II from all the books that have been written, and neither of these stories is on it. So essentially what we have to do is ask people to kind of go back and look at this history again, this World War II, and say, maybe, we need to do more research and figure out how important is this thing really, which can be a hard thing to do, right? Because historians, if they think of it one way, you're asking them to know you got to look at it a different way. And that seems like it can be a challenge to get people to accept essentially new history.
Well, it is interesting, and I will say this at this point, that there are books, I don't know if you spotted, there are books coming out on all sorts of things, on the Bismarck, and still on Dieppe, on Norway, and no one's looked at the prisoners that we've captured in that period, and they could be lower ranked prisoners, but they are all giving up vital intelligence. And I really believe that a study of, you're right, the Ghost Army stories, the bugging operation, for example, I think it's going to change our understanding of the Second World War. Because I was interviewed not so long ago, within the last few weeks, and someone was tracing, going back to Peenemünde and the V1, V2, said that the intelligence came out of one of the prisoner of war camps in Germany, and that's why we bombed Peenemünde. It's not true, but that's the inherited tradition, and there's no, that's why why wouldn't they say that? But, it is changing our understanding. And I think also the other thing that came out of this research for me, I was told that in intelligence circles, without Bletchley Park and the bugging unit across Kendrick's 3 sites, we could have lost the war as late as February 1945. And I found that shocking, even though we're into Germany. And the reason was because Germany could have won the tech war. So it's going back to what you said about the tech. So it's not just, of course, as we said, 1940, it's not just 43 with the V1, V2. We are picking up tons and tons of stuff on tech. And one of the reports at the end of the war says that 95% of what we knew about German night fighter tactics and German radar comes solely from the bugged conversations. Oh. And again, I find that extraordinary. So if you take away that intelligence, I begin to wonder the impact on the war, it doesn't bear thinking about.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interconnected, of course, with all the others, but this is such an important story, and it will change our understanding of the Second World War, I think.
Well, so getting kind of to the nitty-gritty of it, this should come as no surprise to our viewers, but I'm a German general, and as soon as I hear a shot fired in anger, my hands go up like this. How do I go from this to having Savile Row suits made for me at Trent Park?
By tailors from Savile Row. It has to be Savile Row.
Absolutely. I wouldn't turn myself if I got a free suit from Savile Row,
No, it can't be any tailor. It has to be from Savile Row. It's their sense of self-importance.
Their vanity is amazing.
So depending on where they're captured, sometimes they're flown to Britain, sometimes they come by sea. And in my book, you can read, probably actually might even be in a footnote. I will forgive that you haven't read my 1,000 footnotes. But yeah, some of them come via Plymouth, some of them through Hendon Aerodrome, which is now the RAF Museum at Hendon, North London. So that's an interesting connection there. And we have photographs of the generals in particular arriving there. We do think also that some prisoners could there are occasional reference to them arriving at Bovingdon Aerodrome, which was a couple of miles north of Latimer House in Buckinghamshire. So so then they're transferred. Sometimes, as I said earlier, they'll come through Latimer House and Wilson Park, particularly if the house is full at Trent Park. And then they have to decide what they're going to do. So the generals have to share bedrooms, and that causes heck of a kerfuffle. No way, you're not going to
I would never share a bedroom if I were a general, no.
Yes, I love the story.
So
Go
they
ahead.
threatened to move their furniture into the hall, to sleep on the stairs. And Lord Aberfeldy says to him, bless him, you can't help chuckling in the archives, says to him, gentlemen, very seriously, gentlemen, you may sleep on the stairs, you may sleep in the hallway, but you are not to move a single bed from your bedrooms. his bed's being moved out into the corridor. It's just crazy nuts. And the bedrooms were bugged. They were two of them were heavily bugged, a meter apart. We didn't discover any of them.
And Rick is a sneaky guy, so he's in the basement listening to all of my conversations.
Yes, I am.
And writing reports about me. Is that how?
No, it's recorded on special equipment.
Right. Well, I wanted to ask about the recording. So they're recording this, and they would listen to all the mics and then say, "Oh, this conversation is good. We're going to record it." And my understanding from reading the book, even though I didn't look at the 1,000 footnotes, is that I'm sure Chris did, is that they recorded it on transcription discs, on phonograph discs, essentially, like they did recording hit records in the 1940s.
On 78, yes.
Yes. And which I thought was interesting. Did they ever switch over to wire recorders, which was a technology developing at the time, or no? They kept it on these 78s. Are they still around someplace?
We hope so. I mean, they've never been found. They were never found for a documentary. I do have one person who reckons they have got one, but I haven't seen it yet. And it's a reliable, trusted source. So I'm hoping one day. But of course, they could well have deteriorated. It might not be possible to hear anymore.
Oh, believe me, that technology is a wonderful technology because it doesn't deteriorate. And this is another thing we have in common with the Ghost Army, because we've got sound effects 78s, and we want to find them.
Ghost Army.
Yeah, Ghost Army. Well, it had to. I want to raise another topic area, and we've had Xavier's been asking about this, and I want to bring it up, and that's the Holocaust. What did we learn? What did the British learn about the Holocaust from this, and sort of what does it tell us about? But what the German army knew, because they always say, well, we don't really know about this, and then what the British actually knew and when from Trent Park.
Yeah, so Kendrick writes in 1940, most prisoners speak about atrocities. And that's one of the, I suppose, revelations, really, because you are expecting to overhear military stuff, of course, and stuff, air intelligence stuff. But yeah, we are listening to everything. And so from as early as 1940 right the way through to the end of the war, we are amassing, and they kept evidence of the war crimes. And we're picking up what I found incredibly shocking details. So it isn't just, we've shot 3,500 Jews, horrendous as that is. They actually talk about how they did it. And some of it that comes out of one of the sister sites is stuff I've never read before about concentration camps, particularly even some of the medical experimentation stuff. That we don't pick up at Trent Park, but we do at one of the other sister sites. And that for me was the most shocking thing, was just how graphic and how particularly the shootings in the woods, for example, around Riga, on the Eastern Front, and the first references to the mobile gas trucks, which of course we didn't discover until after the liberation of the camps. But British intelligence knew already because they were overhearing it from the bug conversations and Hitler's stud farms, the beautiful Aryan girls that had to sleep with SS officers, and then as soon as the baby was born, the baby was taken away, and they were known as the Lebensborn. It was the Lebensborn Project, and they didn't speak, these survivors, until the 1980s, that whole trauma. So there was a lot of stuff we picked up, and also numbers. By the middle of the war, some of those prisoners are boasting, oh, we've killed 3.5 million Jews or 5 million, and they're arguing about it. And there is a query. The intelligence services aren't sure at that point how accurate the numbers are, but we now know in hindsight incredibly accurate. But what you hinted at, of course, was for 70 years, the German army, the Wehrmacht, had a clean bill of health. It wasn't us, it was the SS, it was the death squads, etc., etc. But we now know from their admissions, and particularly the stuff from the generals at Trent Park, most of them, not all of them, but most of them were complicit in war crimes.
Yeah, I mean that's what shocked me, and it kind of dovetailed with the vanity of these people. They're not just saying, "Oh yeah, I've heard about this." Some of them saying, "I actively participated in this," and that, I think that really shocked me, and it shocked me that they're having these conversations, but then they're complaining about not having enough cigars or German dentists, or that dissonance there. I found really kind of shocking. But so, I mean, it seems pretty clear that obviously the Wehrmacht is hand in glove with the rest of the terror. Is this information being passed up the chain of command? Do we have any sense of what the Allies are doing? Churchill, Roosevelt, any of these people, what are they doing with this information? Or is that yet to be kind of uncovered? Or
Yeah, I think there's still stuff that's been withheld because, without going into detail, because I probably will write about it at some point when I can, there are a couple of secret operations, potentially linked to MI9 actually, with regard to concentration camps. So the fact that the Allies did nothing, which is always what we've believed, is actually potentially not true. And I have a couple of eyewitnesses from concentration camps as well, who said, did we bomb the camps? Did we bomb the lines? A couple of instances we did with it backfires very interestingly. It's like, I wasn't expecting that. But I don't think all the files have come out, and I am still searching, but you've got a whisper that there's something there. And of course, until we took Italy, you couldn't fly deep into enemy territory and back again. So there's still what this stuff throws up, and I think very important for Holocaust education as well. But what it throws up is that age-long question: why didn't the Allies do anything if they knew this stuff? Well, I would now raise the question: did they? And I'm not convinced they just sat back and did nothing. And I think some of it is still classified. They didn't totally stop it, of course. I understand that.
Right.
We have an explosion of questions and comments from our listeners. They're very excited about this. And I would say the one just to clear one thing up. You've written 2 books about this, right? So Doug McCord asked about this. The M Room, that's the earlier book from 8 or 9 years ago when you first found out about it or putting it out there. And then the second book, which is the one that we're talking about today, which is called, I just want to pop it up here, The Walls Have Ears, is the book with the additional information from having talked to people who worked there, having looked at the transcripts and all that. That's pretty much correct, right?
Yes. So the M Room is out of print now, but it is essentially, it's better to, if you've already got the M Room, then the Walls Have Ears has masses of new stuff, critical analysis, which goes beyond, because it is a journey. It was a journey for myself and for just a few secret listeners who were surviving. I also managed to interview intelligence personnel. By the way, with the exception of a lady who can't be interviewed anymore in Australia because mentally deteriorated with Alzheimer's, we have no surviving veterans of this. One of the last surviving veterans, the last surviving secret listener passed away in December 2020, the 7th of December. I think the Times said the 6th, but it was actually the 7th. And then another intelligence officer passed away over the Christmas period, but you have to read the book to find out who that was. I'm guessed already.
Well, good. By the way, great author promotion job there, okay, on all counts. That's like being big. That is the person who's written 25 books and knows what she's doing, Chris. Because if we added our books together, we still we don't get to half of 25. I think we get to 10. I don't know, but it's not 25.
I can't read all of them. But, I think that would be very interesting. In fact, people might like that as a challenge. I'll put that out as a challenge. See who you think the veteran is who passed away. The last surviving, apart from the lady in Australia, the last surviving veteran passed away. It's in my book. Well, they were still alive when I wrote the book. But email me via my website.
I have a guess, but I'm not going to say. So I'm going to leave it to be fair for everybody else. Chris, go ahead.
So Helen, one of the things that I find so moving or tragic about the story is you talk about how 1943 this operation has gotten so large that they need more people to interpret and take all this information down. So Kendrick turns to these Jewish refugees who fled Nazi Germany. They're serving in the Pioneer Corps, and he begins to recruit from them. And you have these people in the basement of this house taking down these conversations. Now, they fled Germany before it got totally out of control, and they're listening to these German officers talk about atrocities committed in their hometowns.
Yeah.
God, I mean, and they can't do anything about it.
No,
what did they say about that experience?
Yeah, I did ask them, and they said you have to keep a professional distance. Yeah, most of them. I mean, there are some exceptions where their families managed to get out, but the vast majority of them lost their families in the Holocaust, and they knew that they were listening to the stuff. Nothing they could have done. But of course, there was always that glimmer of hope that there might have been survivors. And at the end of the war, Kendrick, bless him, gave them leave at different points to go and try, because many of them went to post-war Germany to do vital work with the army, intelligence work with the army. And he gave them leave to go and try and find their relatives. But of course, the awful truth that they discovered, which they knew really. But interestingly, and you've probably picked this up as well, at the end of the war, after the liberation of Belsen, Kendrick insisted that every single one of those German generals watched film footage of the liberation of Belsen, and we bugged their reactions. And of course, they said, we didn't realise it was as bad as this, or I didn't know about it. But most of them, began to talk amongst themselves. How are we going to get off as war criminals? Will you cover for me? And that kind of thing. And Fritz Lustig said to me, when we ourselves are secret listeners, and there were 103 German Jewish secret listeners, when we ourselves saw film footage of Belsen, we didn't realise it was as bad as that. We knew it was bad, but even we were shocked. And they'd seen a lot in Germany. In fact, we did have listeners who survived Sachsenhausen, for example, so they'd seen quite a lot of brutality, but even they were shocked by those images of Belsen. It's utterly horrifying. And I do remember, it's a memorable quote actually from General Felbert, who says, "We're disgraced for all time, and not 1,000 years is going to wipe out what we've done." He's one of the few that actually realises the seriousness and the impact of that horrifying Holocaust. Yeah.
Do the generals? So we have had a couple of questions along this line. I'll put up Doreen's. When did these guys find out it was all a ruse? I'm going to guess they never did. But also, what happened to them in the post-war?
So we never told them. They never found out. And I suppose.
Oops, forgot to mention it.
Yeah, we're not gonna. Well, there are a couple of theories. Of course, end of the Cold War. Well, back then, Berlin Wall's come down quite a while. We were using the same operations. Surprise, surprise, in the Cold War. And also, I think before the last general had passed away, I think we couldn't release this stuff. But I haven't done a trace on every general when they passed away. But my sense is that's when they were finally released. So what happened to them? Well, they were eventually transferred bit by bit, or general by general, small groups of them, to Bridgend in Wales, Nissen huts with barbed wire. And
that's
sorry,
cool.
guys.
Sorry. So Field Marshal von Rundstedt is really cross about this, and he's like strutting around going, "Where's our luxury house gone?" Well, there are no microphones either. But it took 2 to 3 years to repatriate them. They had to go through a process of denazification, of education in democracy. Some of them, their homes were behind the Iron Curtain now, so they'd lost their homes. And of course, because of all the hunt for war criminals, and they potentially, could be discovered, some of them lived under assumed names, but they quietly disintegrated into the society, because they were not all dreams at Trent Park and all their plans to be back in power in post-war Germany. No way, because they realised they could face the noose if the war criminals trials, got them. So it's an interesting twist there, but they did think at one point that they were going to be back in power. And one of Kendrick's officers has written in the margin of the file, these guys are never getting back in power. And again, you get that sense the intelligence services that absolutely no way were these guys going to ever get back into power.
Well, one of the things, again, that just, I don't know, it makes you want to scream when you're reading the book, is you have these German generals, German officers, on record, recorded, saying, I committed this atrocity.
Yeah.
One of the ones that strikes me for some various reasons is Kurt Meyer. Kurt Meyer says, I went into that Russian village and I killed everybody.
Yeah.
The war crimes trials come after the war, and they don't use that information to prosecute these people. Why not?
Yeah, 42,000 Jews of Lublin. They're
Right.
boasting about this stuff. Well, SS Kurt Meyer was tried. He's one of the few that was tried based on evidence not from Trent Park. So there are
Right.
plenty of other evidence of Rostov and all that stuff. But it was a dilemma of intelligence. And one of the things, I uncovered was this really fierce debate within MI9, which is called an umbrella over this whole operation, about whether to release this stuff. And it was divided. Some of the intelligence chiefs wanted to release this stuff to Nuremberg. They did kind of pass the word through to Nuremberg, the prosecutors. General so-and-so is known to have been here and committed atrocities. They didn't say how. See if you can get him to confess. And if he didn't, well, then, of course, they were not. And not a single German general was prosecuted from Trent Park for war crimes. Dilemma of intelligence. We're entering a new war. We're entering the Cold War. We can't admit to this stuff. The files are highly classified, run by a top-secret branch of the intelligence services, which back then officially didn't exist. We tend to forget that, don't we? MI5, MI6, MI9 was disbanded at the end of the war, but none of them officially existed until their official histories came out. And they said, oh, by the way, guys, we exist. Well, we all knew that, but we exist. Yeah, we all knew that. But so again, I think we do forget that. We take it for granted today.
We have a couple of, we're not going to get to all the questions we have, but a couple of people have asked sort of something we've touched on, and Wallace Morrison put it this way: how much of the atrocity information was reported to Churchill? And again, and I guess this is a way of asking, sort of the Howard Baker question from Watergate: how much did we know? And when did we know it? I mean, how much did Churchill know about the Holocaust? Did he know stuff that he then was suppressing, or, what's the story?
Yeah, it's not so much that he's suppressing it, because don't forget there are lots of sources for some of the stuff on the Holocaust, including stuff being smuggled out from the camps. They're picking up stuff from Bletchley Park, from the police traffic in Russia on the Eastern Front. So that's 1941, and so we're picking it up from different areas, but these top secret sections like Bletchley Park, the units like Bletchley Park, like Trent Park and its sister sites, that stuff, couldn't be made publicly available. But there was, in December 1942, a couple of moments of silence for victims of the Holocaust in the Houses of Parliament, and a speech, the same day Winston Churchill's wife gives a very important speech. If I'm not mistaken, it was at the Anglo-Palestine Association, as it then was. So a lot of stuff was known, but what is unquestionable is the fact that the detail and the depth of what they're picking up the conversations wasn't known in the public domain, but it was certainly known to Churchill. But of course, he couldn't use it because it's a top secret unit. I mean, occasionally he slipped very close to revealing some of the stuff. And so they decided not to show him everything. I'm not just saying about atrocity, don't show him this, because he might leak it to Parliament.
So, Helen, before I go on, I just want to say, if we post your website on our website, can people ask you questions that we don't get to? Because we're getting so many questions that I'm sure, they would like to hear.
Or they can buy the book.
Well, of course they're going to buy it.
I just want to mention you can buy the book, The Walls Have Ears. Helen, you're not upset if people buy the book, right?
Well, the point is, I got a deal. if you buy the book and read it and you've still got questions, then email me, because
There you go.
I'm about to do the proofs of my next book, which you've
Awesome.
got to enjoy.
We will.
I've got to get to that, otherwise you'll have nothing else to read.
Oh, well, okay. So
You get a last question, though, Chris, if you want.
I put my foot in my mouth. There. All right. Well, fine.
Oh, that's all right. You're all good.
So, the war ends, and the word gets out about Bletchley Park, and they make movies about it, and it's famous, and everybody knows about it. This is still relatively unknown, and so kind of two questions. One is, the veterans that worked in this operation, did they ever have a sense of like, hey, we were there too, and we were kind of we were part of all this? Did they feel that, how do they feel about that? And also, BBC has said that Bletchley Park shortens the war by 2 to 4 years. And kind of in your professional opinion, how much did Trent Park shorten the war?
I think it's hard to say, because I know Bletchley Park now is trying to move away from the idea that it shortened the war by 2 years or 4 years. It's not very kind of, it's a kind of not the thing at the moment. It's hard to say. What I will say, because making a judgment like that, so I absolutely think that in 1943 we would have lost the war without it. And why? Because I've uncovered new stuff. And I'm sorry about this, guys. I don't normally do this, but it's in my next
It's okay.
book.
No, absolutely.
Everybody put your hands over your ears. Now, Helen, you just tell us. Okay. Wow.
And what was your other question about?
What did the people that worked there feel
yes.
about kind of the lack of attention on what they've done?
Well, of course, none of them got any recognition because it's top secret work.
Right.
And when I got to it, I only interviewed half a dozen secret listeners. All the rest had died. So most of them, well, they did. The vast majority of the personnel went to their graves carrying their secrets. And those closest to Kendrick would have known the impact of what they'd done. However, the secret listeners and German Jewish refugee women as well working at this site, not as listeners but in other roles, that's it, lovely. They were told it was important, but they never understood. And Fritz said, when we launched the M Room all those years ago, he said publicly, and it was very moving, he said, I've spent the last 70 years feeling guilty for having had a safe war. He said, I lost comrades on the battlefields, friends, British and refugee friends, and he said, I felt guilty. And he said, now I can be proud of what I've done. It's quite, it's really moving. And his wife also worked with him at the site. Yeah, what more can you say? I really wished those other personnel could have understood just how significant. And, a lot of those papers, they're so dense, the conversations, it's really hard to get the story out of it. And if it hadn't been for Fritz, I think I might have given up. You pull up these volumes of conversations and files, massive stuff. What do you do with it? But I promised him, I said to him, yeah, look, Fritz, I'll get to it and I'll do it. And we did. It was a journey together with some other secret listeners. So, yeah.
We're very glad you did.
Yeah. Well, Helen, thank you.
No.
Thank
we've got to be the guardians of that legacy, actually.
Well, we'll keep an eye on the new stuff that you have, and then we'll try to readjust our view of World War II based on what you come up with. I think we better be ready for that. I want to thank you for joining us. Somebody asked if you can visit Trent Park today. You can't, but maybe soon, right? There's no museum there now, but perhaps something that's in the future.
I think people will just have to Google that. I'm not involved in the museum at Trent Park, but they can Google.
Yes,
you can walk around the building.
Yeah.
Yes.
But anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and best of luck to you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Buy the book, guys.
Yeah, buy the book.
We're here in Lexington, Massachusetts, where we're reenacting the Battle of Lexington. The two of us.
Shot heard around the room.
Chris is playing the forces of Great Britain, so I'm going to have to die during this reenactment. Yeah. And so thanks for joining this Encore presentation of History Happy Hour. And next week, what do we got?
Our National History Day special.
Yeah, so we're going to talk to, I think we've got 5 different student individuals or groups who won gold medals, national gold medals with their National History Day projects. You're going to be blown away by this.
I am, which is something neither Rick nor I would ever have done. So.
No. So Please join us then.
Take care. Be safe, everybody.